Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special video where I recently reached 3 years of returning to making a bunch of YouTube videos and have consistently uploaded a minimum of one video a week, more often more than just one video a week for the last 3 years. And I wanted to celebrate this milestone by creating a video that I have always wanted to create, and that is a Q&A where I just enjoy answering questions and I enjoy interacting with other people. So I asked for some questions and I have a few that I'm going to go through in this video, where if you have any questions to ask me, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and if I do happen to make another Q&A video in the future, I'll go ahead and answer them there, and if I decide not to, I'll go ahead and just reply to your comment with my answer. Starting off, if you were playing hide and seek in Tyria, where would you hide? My first basic idea, and I guess my answer to this question, is I would probably hide in the Tangled Depths, because it is a pretty confusing map for a bunch of players to navigate through, and there are a ton of very interesting and like slightly out of the way, slightly secret areas that you can get to. But a more interesting part of the Tangled Depths is how you can break out of the map, as you can do in pretty much every Guild Wars 2 map, where I guess Tangled Depths is a pretty easy map to break out of, so a lot of players do know how to break out of that map. But out of bounds inside of Tangled Depths is absolutely massive. It might be one of the biggest like out of bounds maps into the entire game, where there's just like so many different places around here that you can explore. And I think I would try to hide somewhere around here where there are like a bunch of like different chasms and whatnot that you can like dive down into. But I think I would probably try to navigate around to like the Nuhawk area, because there's this like big stretch area and I could hide in like a back corner, and it's like pretty far away from like the conventional entrances, and I could probably try to hide like somewhere on the map where it looks like I'm in like Nuhawk, or in the caves underneath Nuhawk or something like that, for players who like maybe are able to find me on the map for like whatever reason. Another spot that I talked a little bit more about recently was in Diasa Plateau, where there is like the sewer area, and I was talking about like this kind of hidden area off in the corner here, where you can then like run up the staircase and then glide or like raptor jump over into this hole in the wall and then hide here, which is a very tricky area. And it's probably significantly easier to get to this spot than it is out of bounds at Nuhawk, but I think it could be another fun area. But if you don't want to be a little cheesy and we don't want to hide out of bounds in Tyria, and if I were to hide like somewhere in the bounds of like Tyria that we could explore without like breaking out of the map, I think I would pick Gutra's Secret, which is in Lornar's Pass, and it is a special Order of Whispers base, which I love a lot. And this also means only players who have a character in the Order of Whispers can get here in the first place, and it's kind of just like a random base that's really like nowhere in the world, kind of like it's in the middle of Lornar's Pass, and Lornar's Pass is like a big area that has like a lot of important stuff going on, but like this is just a point of interest and a waypoint that people pretty much just run past, and a lot of people don't even realize you can even enter into here, because it has like a couple of layers of security / like secret stuff that you have to interact with in order to get into this base itself. Next, what is your favorite aspect of Tyria's world building? And I think it has to be kind of like the general idea of how interconnected Tyria is like politically and socially between like different nations and people, where we see this constantly throughout Guild Wars 2, and I really appreciate it as it's like developed and like expanded upon, where I think Jan3 Wilds has done a fantastic job at this, and is actually one of my favorite parts of the Jan3 Wilds expansion. But going back to like 2012 Guild Wars 2, we see like all the different nations of the world, where we have like the different 5 main races, and then we could consider like Lion's Arch kind of like a city-state within Kryta, and then we have like all the lesser races which have different strongholds and outposts and whatnot around the world, and just like all of the different like factions that you interact with in Tyria are interconnected to some extent, where basically like the second biggest story of original Guild Wars 2, secondary to like fighting Zaitan, a dragon of death that like has a risen army, is basically uniting the world of Tyria, all the different factions, all the different people. And Guild Wars 2 has really focused on this idea of like community and like partnership, and by working together you're able to overcome like insurmountable odds. And that's like one of the biggest like story beats and like meanings in the story that is constantly expressed time after time again in Guild Wars 2, and I do genuinely enjoy it. We're like seeing the different races come together into the 3 different orders, and then the 3 different orders united into the pact is really cool. But we see like the pact as like a big organization that includes a lot of people, but then with the pact, and you can really like see this in like Living World Season 2 and at the Silver Wastes if you're in Camp Resolve. I love Camp Resolve so much just because we see what the pact is and how the forces of Tyria kind of work together to combat like the evil forces. Where if you wander around Camp Resolve, we see the pact with the Order Whispers, the German Priory, and the Vigil, but you see contingents of different factions from all across Tyria that are basically trying to like contribute to the pact's war efforts in the Maguma Desert, to how they are able to, where you see like some Blood Legion soldiers walking around and like some Seraph soldiers walking around and some Valiants and so on and so forth. You got some like Asurans who are like tinkering on like different things around here. And you can see stuff like this all around Tyria, where in like the Brisbane Wildlands we see how interconnected 3 completely separate like law enforcement organizations of 3 different races are working together within Brisbane Wildlands, where you have like the Asuran who like, you know, are around Radasum, but they have the Peacekeepers who are organizing with the Wardens of the Savari, and then also the human Seraphs from Queensdale and whatnot are all working together in Brisbane Wildlands. And it's cool to see like these 3 different races like working together to some extent, and basically like trying to fight like the 3 counterparts of each of the races in the Brisbane Wildlands. But then like you go into the, you know, Queensdale and Kryta, and you even see like some of this like interconnected political like landscape, where you have like 3 major law enforcement organizations, where you have the Seraph, which are basically like the general law enforcement who have guards everywhere, and then you have the Shining Blade, who are an incredible like historical organization, who are the Queen's Guardians, and then you have the Ministry Guard, who are like the protectors of the Ministry and Kryta. And these 3 different law enforcement organizations, or guard organizations, or military organizations, whatever, are, you know, disconnected from one another, but are also like deeply connected with one another. And you experience this throughout the personal story. You see this in like Living World Season 3 and whatnot, and there's just like a lot of like just interconnectedness going on. And I feel like it makes the world of Tyria feel like living and like much bigger than it actually is, because we could see like each organization basically added into the game, and they could have stories that are connected to them that players experience. And then once you're done with those stories, or once you're done with like that area of the world, you're basically done interacting with that organization because they have served their purpose. But with how we actually see it in Guild Wars 2, each or many of the organizations are like living, breathing organizations which do expand over time. Like with the Pact, we see Marshal Traherne die, and then you turn down the position of Pact Marshal, and we see the Pact like change and ebb and flow over the years of Guild Wars 2, and now it's currently in like a relatively stable state with Marshal Logan Thackeray at the helm. And going back to what I said about Giant 3 Wilds, they have really expanded on this idea of how interconnected the world is. And it just feels really, really cool to see kind of like the different organizations of Tyria working together once again. It feels like it's kind of becoming like a much bigger thing than it was back in 2012, because we see like all of the different nations, including like Alona and Cantha, which are now introduced into the game, with like Alona having like 4 different major factions that are kind of like power struggling for like that region of the world, and then Cantha has all their stuff going on. And we just see like all the different lesser races, you know, have different amounts of power in Tyria, and they're interacting with all the different races of the world. And we now have the Lowland Coden, and we also have the slightly less recent Astral Ward and Wizard's Court playing a part in Tyrian politics now. And it's just really cool to see how interconnected Tyria really is. And it's nice to see that like different factions and different story beats, like from 2012 and even all the way back to like 2005 with like the Shining Blade to some extent, still play a major part in Tyrian world building and like how they interact with the world and how they interact with each other and with the narrative. And I really hope we get to see this kind of like idea continuing forward, where we don't see like different factions just dropped. We see them expand and change over time, because that is what happens in real life, where, you know, nations rise and fall, different like organizations and companies and communities and whatnot within nations and other type of things like rise and fall and change and like evolve over time, and change depending on like other circumstances like technological advancement and stuff like that. And overall, largely, I just think Guild Wars 2 has done a really good job at that. But I guess also really quickly, my least favorite aspect of Tyria's world building, and I'm not like 100% sure if this is like my least favorite, but it's actually really connected to this, and it's kind of like the lack of everything that I just said to like a much broader extent, where Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2 are very focused on like Central Tyria, Alona, and Cantha, and kind of like the surrounding regions, where we don't really know too much about what is going on elsewhere on the planet of Tyria, where there are hints that there are other civilizations and like nations and whatnot out there, but it hasn't really been expanded upon at all in Guild Wars 2 or Guild Wars. And I think that is something I guess like an expansion. I would love to like visit another nation we have never seen anything about, that is like super far away, but it isn't necessarily something that I need necessarily, but I would like to see like more hints and suggestions to expand like the overall like world building of Tyria. Next, what are some of your favorite silly and fun items to collect in Guild Wars 2, like marsh frogs for instance, and could we pretty please have a top 10 video on that subject in the future? Well, you inspired me, and I have been working on a top 10 video that I will be releasing pretty soon. I also got a comment that said top 10 chairs, period, and I am also working on a video for that, though it will probably take me a little bit more time than this one, where I think you kind of answered the question directly, where my favorite silly and fun item to collect in Guild Wars 2 might have to be marsh frogs, actually, like you said. Marsh frogs are just really fun, where they are my favorite frog in Guild Wars 2. And it is kind of like a popular thing for people in the Guild Wars 2 community to collect, where there's even a Guild Wars 2 efficiency stat that is tracking this, and you can just run around that area in the Blood-Tide Coast and collect a bunch of marsh frogs and just fill up your inventory and just like pad that stat a little bit, I guess. And it's kind of funny to see when people share like full inventories of marsh frogs, because one, is just like a really silly and fun thing to collect that doesn't really have any meaning for like anything in the game, other than the fact that like gaming should be fun, and if you have fun doing this really random silly thing, I think that is definitely a good use of your time. But also, it's kind of an achievement to collect a bunch of marsh frogs, because they stack in stacks at 250, and you find them around this area, so you have to like run around and get them, and it can take a pretty long time to like fill up an entire inventory. So to some extent, that is more impressive than doing some other stuff in Guild Wars 2, though I guess it's kind of more of a test of patience and whatnot. Where I think when Guild Wars 2 is kind of like done being developed and we move on to like a Guild Wars 3 or whatever else in the future, I've always wanted to do something when that happens, where I play through every single one of my characters through like the entire story and the world, and just like get 100% map completion in every map from 2012 to like 2032 or whenever Guild Wars 2 ends development. And I want to complete all of the story and just basically like finish everything on that character and have like my armor set like completely decked out for that character, and then retire that character by like liquidating everything in my inventory and just logging out forever in a certain spot. But something I've actually been recently thinking, even before you commented this, was that I wanted to take that character, each and every single one of my characters that I finish Guild Wars 2, I guess you could say, on, to this area in the Blood-Tide Coast, and basically just like collect all of the marsh frogs that I can in my inventory, or fill up my inventory most of the way with marsh frogs, and then just log out forever with that character having a ton of marsh frogs. And that would pad my marsh frog collected stats a little bit, which I think would be kind of like a funny thing to do. And maybe one day I'll be number one, though I doubt that will ever happen. As for some other fun collectibles you can get, I'll make a full video about this in the future, but spoons are like a pretty popular thing to collect, where I do enjoy people like wishing happy spoon time or whatever when Torquato is dying has always been kind of like a fun tradition, which does actually happen a little bit less nowadays. And I think it's kind of fun to collect all the spoons for that one collection anyways. I know Mini Professor Mew is a pretty popular item for some players to collect, especially in Fractals of the Mist. It's not necessarily like something I particularly like to collect. Something I really enjoy collecting kind of is food items, where I loved cooking when I first started playing Guild Wars 2 all the way back in 2012, and I like saved onto like a bunch of different food items. But since then I did like sell or consume or delete whatever all those food items. But much more recently, which is like a few years ago now, my fiance started playing Guild Wars 2, and she, just like me all the way back in the day, just absolutely loved cooking and collected pretty much every recipe you could collect at the time. But she sent me like a bunch of food items that are foods that I enjoy in real life, which she cooked for me in the game, and I do still have them in my bank, just holding on to them forever. And then the final question, which llama is the best? And this is a funny question, where there are actually a ton of llamas in Guild Wars 2, and most of the time they serve as kind of like a hidden secret that is like difficult to get to, and there's often an achievement with like the 3 llamas and dry top, and then there's like a full like collection quote unquote achievement to get all the llamas in like the Heart of the Mist lobby, where in the Heart of the Mist I do definitely like the llamas that you can find in the jumping puzzle, just because you have to do the jumping puzzle to get to them. But for my favorite llama, it might actually have to go to the llama we find in Janthir Wilds in the Lowland Shore, partially because it's just completely different than every other llama we really see in the game, where we have like a bunch of like minis from PvP and like a bunch of llamas that are kind of like difficult to get to. This llama is just hanging out here in this little farm garden area with a bunch of other animals, which I just love a lot. I also like the llamas that you can find in the Desert Highland, where they have like a special Crystal Desert version, where I just really like how these llamas are like introduced to the game and then they just exist in the game, so we might as well use them elsewhere. And I think the one in Lowland Shore is just in like a very scenic and beautiful area that is just like very nice, and it's nice to just see a llama hanging out here. And that is all the questions that I have. Where thank you so much for watching through this video. I have enjoyed making this video, and it's been a lot of fun to finally do a Q&A, which I have been wanting to do. And like I said at the start of this video, if you want to ask a question, feel free to leave it down in the comments. And if I do end up making another Q&A in the future, I'll go ahead and use that question there. And if I don't end up making one, I'll go ahead and just reply to your comment with my answer. But thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.